and his running said, "See you in 12 years, boys," said the bartender. "Every 12 years I expect a reunion. Next time, bring back Jack. Drive carefully, Neil. The cops are getting mean. San Francisco is not what it used to be." "Nothing ever is," said Allen. "That's the definition of change. Things move on." We left the bar and climbed into the van. It was a classic pre-hippie mobile, the kind that became so popular that a few months later, Neil got behind the wheel, and as if on cue, two stunning young women, classic California beauties with rich manes of natural blonde hair, tapped on the door of the van. "We're here, Neil. Let us in," said the taller one of the two. Neil opened the door and ushered both women into the empty front seat. He introduced us to them, mimicking W.C. Fields as a train conductor announcing different stations. "Gals, I'd like to introduce you to everybody here that you don't already know. In addition to Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, and Peter Orlovsky, who of course you have met innumerable times before today's special journey, we have Mr. Freddie Red." Mr. Freddie Red is a legendary master of jazz piano who has not only played with all the greats, but considered by his peers to be one of the greats himself. You certainly all know Gary Goodrow, who can improvise a whole play on the spot from suggestions from the audience, in the same way as our special visitor Dave Amram, sitting right up here in the front seat behind you, directly to the left side of the aisle of our little limo. Dave, as I'm sure you have heard, can make up scat poems anywhere, anytime, as he did after intermission when he did his first jazz poetry readings in New York City with Kerouac back in 1957, because when the poets would disappear during the break, leaving him hanging hopelessly in front of an angry mob of off-duty New York heathen waiting for the troops to return from their poetry break, which of course, as I'm sure you gals know, was led by old Jack himself, including Philip Lamantia and Howard Hart, who were unable to stop their street-side wine-guzzling and women-chasing with their newfound fans and returned to bail out poor old Dave by reading their latest masterpieces, which forced Dave to make up scat parables with rhymes at the piano so that the audience who still remained wouldn't attack him physically, as well as abuse him verbally, possibly destroying his French horn chops and stifling his creativity forever. So, darlings, please make yourselves at home on our little journey and tour of the Bay Area, and everyone say hello to Tiffany and Mary. As we leave on our way towards Columbus Avenue and the joys of San Francisco's many pleasures, before arriving at 6:45 at our final destination of Fisherman's Wharf for a sound check prior to tonight's reading, Tiffany, do you have a word to say to all of us assembled here? "Hello, everyone," said Tiffany, gently putting her arms around Neil's chest and shoulders as he continued rapping away, driving and talking over his shoulder. "Of course," said Neil, "our trip is made complete by the holy, hale, and hearty, most divine Miss Mary, who is gracing us with her presence this afternoon." "Hi," said Mary. She took Neil's right hand and began massaging it as he drove with his left hand on the wheel, continuing his tour guide monologue. "Nice to be with you all, fellows." "Yeah, I'm sure it is," said Gregory Corso in a sullen tone. Neil began talking to me as Gregory and Alan started one of their endless arguments. He continued driving with one hand, managing somehow to steer the van through the traffic and respond to Mary's hand massages and Tiffany's neck rubs with moans of approval while carrying on a conversation with me. Dave, can you believe how there's a new army of young kids who no longer call themselves beatniks, but they think that somehow we are responsible for them wanting to drop out of life instead of meeting it head on? They never heard a note of jazz, never read a book beyond its cover, never hitched a ride, or lay out on the field somewhere at night with their true love to talk about ecstasy here on earth. They think I'm a living legend and that Jack is their father figure, and most of them never read a word he wrote. They have no idea of who we are, how we got the way we got to be. Alan can deal with this. He's a master of change and fashion. I'm not. I'm stuck in the middle of the stream, up Schitt's Creek, without a paddle. I'm derailed. The train left without me. I'm in the caboose, all alone with my saxophone. Hey, girls, do you want to hear something Jack and Dave and I grew up with? It's a railroad song. Neil started singing Chattanooga Choo Choo. After completing the course of the bridge, he made up lyrics with rhymes, snapping his fingers with his right hand, which he temporarily freed from Mary's hand on the second and fourth beats, while Tiffany was now patting and massaging his head and kissing his neck as if he were her exotic lapdog. Neil scattered 4 perfectly constructed bars, conducting an imaginary orchestra with his right hand without missing a finger snap, while continuing to drive with his left like a crazed ambidextrous race car driver's symphony conductor, watching the traffic, smiling at both Tiffany and Mary, flashing occasional fleeting glances over his shoulder at each of us in the van while making up scat verses. He began to sing, "You gals think you love me, but you don't understand. You gotta pay your dues before you sit in with this band." Neil continued scat singing as all of us in the band responded with laughter, verses of our own, whoops of approval, or insults. "You're like so bizarre, like, oh man, you're so like a real beat tramp," squealed Tiffany, bursting into uncontrollable giggles. "That was amazing, Neil," said Alan in a professorial tone of voice. "That really sucked," rasped Gregory. "Get out of the poetry scene. That Scott doggerel is for morons." "Oh, like really? Like you don't know, Gregory?" said Tiffany, throwing her arms around Neil's neck as if to protect him. "Neil is a genius. Jack never would have written On the Road if it hadn't been for him. He's the real Dean Moriarty." "You don't have to educate me, sweetheart. Educate yourself," said Gregory. "Finish junior high school so you can read something behind comic books," snarled Gregory like Humphrey Bogart in a gangster movie. "Oh, you're just jealous," said Mary, kissing Neil's ear and rumpling his hair. "No one ever wrote a book about you." "No one ever has to," said Gregory. "I write my own books." During this exchange, Neil kept on singing softly, like a seasoned tap dancer, and he came in right on cue. "Girls and boys, let's not fight. Scat with me until you get it right. I'll never become a rock and roll slave. Hip those kids to the message, Dave." I began scatting and about meeting Dizzy Gillespie in my basement apartment in Washington, D.C. in 1951, how Charlie Parker came there in 1952, how in my memoir, the great conductor Dimitri Mitropoulos inspired me to dare to continue to be a composer of concert music as well as a jazz musician, and who was a man who loved literature, jazz, art, and mountain climbing, and was devoutly religious, like Jack. how Jack and I had met at the first 1956 Bring Your Own Bottle parties, and how I wished Jack could become a new brakeman for the Chattanooga Choo Choo and ride the rails back to San Francisco to be with all of us and hang out and hear the new cantata that I had just written with Langston Hughes. Neil and I then sang the final lyrics for Chattanooga Choo Choo. "Whoa!" exclaimed Neil. "I think I can get you a booking at the National Association of Schizophrenics and Manic Depressives annual convention," said Gary Goodrow. "There might be an opening." "I wish we could do something like we just did now at your concert at the San Francisco Opera House," said Neil.
"You wouldn't have to worry about the concert going into overtime,"
said Gregory.
"You'd empty out the house before you finish the first 5 minutes. Get out of the poetry scene. It's not your game."
"We're not in the poetry scene, Gregory," I said. "We're just having fun."
"Well, I'm not," said Gregory. "All those beautiful girls keep walking down the street, and I'll never see them again."
"Wait till your poetry reading tonight," said Alan. "If you show your loving side, you'll find someone to share your love with."
"I don't want to hear any more of that Buddhist crap, Alan. I want some action," shouted Gregory. "Right now."
I remember Jack telling me about how much he dug working with you on that cantata. "A Year in Our Land," said Neil softly, as if Gregory, who had now opened up the window, was shouting at startled passerbys, and Gregory wished they weren't even there. We all knew that Gregory had a heart of gold and felt obliged to be outrageous in order to feel comfortable with other people. Like the comedian Don Rickles, he displayed affection by insulting people, only if he felt that it wouldn't hurt them. "Oh, Jack should be here for all of this," said Neil. "He loves Langston Hughes poetry. Have you girls ever heard of the great Langston Hughes?"
"Well, we have now," said Mary enthusiastically. "Oh, hold it there. Did he play with the guitar with the band that opened up for Screaming Jay Hawkins? He was he had such a firm little butt,"
said Tiffany. "No, darling," said Neil. "He's a great poet that Jack and all of us admired. He was part of the Harlem Renaissance."
"You mean he actually lived up there in Harlem?" said Tiffany. "Wasn't he frightened? You know, like being around all those, different types of people? Like those Puerto Rican, Mexican types that can't speak English, and those black people, and the Jewish Italian gangsters?"
"No," said Neil wearily, rolling his bloodshot eyes in despair. "He wasn't afraid at all. He and County Cullen, Duke Ellington, and a whole lot of other visionaries set the stage for the whole world that Jack and Dave and I grew up in. Our best music, art, theater, and poetry never would have come out the way it did without the Harlem Renaissance." "Well said, Neil," murmured Alan.
"I've heard of the Harlem Globetrotters," said Mary. "Forget about it," rasped Gregory. "These dumb chicks don't get it and never will."
"You're just jealous," cooed Mary. "Neil's a living legend.
You know we'd never go out with you. You're not famous. You're just along for the ride."
"Just a minute, young ladies," said Alan, suddenly becoming angry, the way he used to be in the 50s when he'd fall into fits of rage at the drop of a hat, before his recent trips to India cooled him out. "Gregory Corso is a great lyric poet. I prefer his work to mine. Jack really respects his work in spite of their differences. Have you read Gregory's poetry, Tiffany? Have you read his work, Mary?
I don't read much of anything, said Mary. I dig people, not books about people.
I'm with you on that, said Freddie Red from the back seat.
Well, no, said Tiffany. I know that Jack is beautiful. I read On the Road 4 times in the Subterraneans.
I read them too, said Mary.
Those books are real. You don't have to have a college professor to understand what he's saying. Neil got us to read Franz Kafka, too. He's weird.
You guys think we're stupid because we've never been to New York, said Tiffany. Well, let me tell you something. This is a big country, and your small minded attitude makes you all mental midgets. That's why we love Jack and Neil. They're for real. Mary and I wish we could meet Jack. We feel like we know him just from reading his books. When we met Neil, it was like he was part of our family.
I can't believe you completed a sentence,
said Gregory Corso.
Ah, shut up,
said Tiffany. Save all your insults for those pathetic women that go to hear you read your poems.
They're not so pathetic,
said Gregory.
They're intelligent. They're sensitive. They want meaning and romance in their lives. I'm like Jack. I come from the classic tradition of literature. I'm self-taught. I went to libraries like Jack did. I read all the time when I was in jail. Jack read when he was out at sea. We were both naturals. Neil is a natural. Dave is a natural. So are Gary and Freddie. That's why we're all friends. We're all drifting down the same stream.
Without a paddle, gals, said Neil. Understand that. Society wouldn't let us on board their train, so we built our own canoes, and now they've taken away our paddles. But we're cool because we know how to improvise.
How about Jack?
Said Tiffany in a different tone of voice than we had heard when she had gotten on the bus. Suddenly, she wasn't playing the dumb blonde role. Where's he going? What is he doing with his life? Dave is in touch with him more than any of us right now, said Neil. But he still has his typewriter. He can still write about anything and make it meaningful and interesting to anybody and everybody. He remembers everything. He wrote my greatest books for me. I want to write about what he left out, about the parts of my life that are left over. But gals, let's not become morbid as we remember the words of that old standard with my improved lyrics. You're so young, and I'm so beautiful. Neil began singing, making up a song based on the old classic, and Mary and Tiffany went back to their party mode. Neil began to have a monologue about all the big bands from Chick Webb, Lucky Millinder, the great territory bands of the Southwest and Midwest, the golden days of Kansas City when Mary Lou Williams, Jay McShann, Charlie Parker, Buddy Tate, and Roy Eldridge all played at jam sessions there, and when Count Basie set the stage for Coleman Hawkins and then Lester Young to pursue their own stylistic innovations for all the music that hit the world, and vocalists like Billie Holiday changing the way we looked at music forever. Like Jack, Neil Cassidy was a true scholar of the streets who knew jazz as an observer but understood the language and had the heart and the soul of a true musician. Like Jack, he had a natural rapport with musicians. Like Jack, he had a deep respect for the geniuses, unknown and unknown, who helped create the body of work that helps move all of America, as well as the whole world of music, forward. Gals, said Neil, we're dealing with more than show business here when we talk about jazz. This is the music that both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X grew up with. The sanctified church is the foundation of most of what we hear. Jazz will always be the voice of our innermost dreams that we dare not utter, and these musicians articulate it for us. Jazz tells us we can dare to keep on dreaming.
That sounds like the Sigmund Freud shot,
Said Gregory testily. Sigmund Freud was a cokehead, said Neil. He was so self-concerned he never got laid. That's why he appeals to people with a poor self-image. He couldn't dig himself, so he didn't dig others.
Well, we dig you, Neil, said Mary, because you're the coolest. Let's stop here for a minute and go on up to my apartment with Tiffany. I'll take a bath, and you can tell us more about Edgar Casey.
All Rita Rooney, said Neil, winking at me. I'll be right back, fellas. Mary, Tiffany, and I are going to go deep sea diving in her bathtub and see if we can find Edgar Casey's lost Isle of Atlantis. Neil parked the van. Tiffany and Mary got out of the passenger seat, and Neil leapt up from the driver's seat, ran around to the front of the van, and bounded up the stairs of the small apartment house ahead of Tiffany and Mary.
Hey,
yelled Gregory.
Let me come too. I need a bath. I'll tell you all about Keats and Shelley and Lord Byron and all about him drowning at sea.
Forget it, short stuff, said Mary over her shoulder as she climbed the stairs behind Neil and Tiffany. You're too mean to be a playmate of ours.
I keep telling you, Gregory,
that you have to let your natural sweetness and inner beauty flow outwards, said Alan gently.
I don't need to hear the Hare Krishna shot, Alan. Save that for your act with the college students. I just want some action.
Yes, said Alan, but those girls have feelings. You can't talk to women like that anymore. They are people, too. Neil and Jack and I have compassion for the women they are with. Groaned Gregory.
Another lecture about compassion. Dave, how does it feel hearing all this crap? Is this the set of Pull My Daisy revisited 6 years later? Is this the old nostalgia shot? Is this the beat version of the Elks Club Shriners Convention, Hadassah Sons of Italy, Knights of Columbus beat football team's high school reunion? Why isn't Jack here?
He is, I said. I can hear him laughing and writing it all down on his notepad in his head. We knew that Neil and the two ladies were going to be upstairs for a while, so we all kept rapping, talking about all the things that were happening around the country with all of our old friends and their struggles to survive, and how the Vietnam War was like a silent nightmare that wouldn't go away and seemed to be dividing up the whole country. I don't understand what's happened to Jack. He's become a warmonger, said Alan. I don't think so, Alan, I said. He loves his country. He was on a merchant ship in World War II that went down right after he sailed on it. All aboard were killed. He had a lot of friends on board. I know all that, said Alan. But can't you see what our government is doing to the world? That's beside the point, I said. He doesn't trust opportunists who are creating a youth culture designed to make money off of young people by immobilizing them and handing the whole country over to the right wing. And that's what's happening. The whole drug culture is a form of genocide, too. And he feels betrayed by feeling forced to join something. He feels it is jive. He feels the military-industrial complex is now joined by the anti-war industrial complex, and that progressive politics has been taken over by the entertainment industry and handing the whole country over to the Philistines. He feels it's jive. I'd say jive ass, said Freddie Red from the back seat. You think all that dope that comes to Harlem gets there by accident? Do you think high school kids should be encouraged by the entertainment industry to drop acid? This is genocide. Jazz brought black and white people together and people all over the world to a higher level. So the music business tolerated heroin to get rid of us. The airwaves are controlled by gangsters and big business. The Vietnam War is a waste. So are the hustlers who are ripping off the kids who are against it. That's what you should be dealing with, said Freddie. You don't see any gurus and limos driving around Harlem. We'd throw their jive asses out. Jack feels betrayed, I said. He tells me that he feels isolated. His forebears came here from French Canada for a better life. He loves this country and the whole American continent. He always tells me about wanting to find his Indian heritage that he feels was part of his Canadian family's past. He thinks he has Iroquois ancestry. He tells me how he can feel something coming through him, and that how so many Indians here and in Mexico tell him that they can see that in him. That's some heavy stuff. He's very humbled by that. That's got nothing to do with politics. That's got everything to do with politics, said Allen. The corporations are destroying the planet. If you endorse this war, you are not only a warmonger, you are a corporate oppressor. Well, if Dave's a corporate oppressor, he should buy some more expensive clothes and move out of that rent controlled rat trap on 6th Avenue and stop going out with waitresses who want to be opera singers and give me $1 million, said Dreary, suddenly becoming animated.
Davy, may you
How
go
about it?
back 2 sentences, please, because we cut out.
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you.
Okay, that's got everything to do with politics, said Allen. The corporations are destroying the planet. If you endorse this war, you are not only a warmonger, you are a corporate oppressor.
Well, if Dave is a corporate oppressor, he should buy some more expensive clothes and move out of that rent control dump on 6th Avenue and stop going out with waitresses who want to be opera singers and give me $1 million,
said Gregory, suddenly becoming animated.
How about it, Dave? Can you sell me one of those tanks you manufacture and give me the money? I'll dedicate another poem to you if you do. The Thanksgiving poem I dedicated to you in 1957 was a gift, but it was short. Give me $1 million warmonger corporate dollars and I'll write you a whole book of poems. And then I'll turn you on to some of my leftover ladies.
Thank you, Gregory, I said. I'm cool the way I am. I just want to get this new cantata played right. I'm glad you can all come to the concert.
I just want to see you all dressed up like the Penguin and Batman,
said Gregory.
Mez McGillicuddy puts on the dog.
I'd be interested to see how you set Langston Hughes' verses to music, said Allen. I used the same approach I did when I set Jack's words to The Lonesome Traveler and the words of Steinbeck, Whitman, Thomas Wolfe, James Baldwin, and Don Dos Passos. I tried to honor the natural musicality of what was already there and enhance it, just like when I spontaneously accompanied Jack or you guys. I try to listen and to feel what it's all about. Well, frankly, David, said Allen, you must realize that you are living to a large extent in the past. Why don't you play rock music? Jazz is dead. Classical music is dead. This is 1965. Kids want to hear simple songs that they can hum back after one hearing. You could make millions of dollars. Television commercials are changing the world. America is sinking to its knees. Don't allow yourself to become passé. Allen, what's beautiful stays beautiful. Charlie Parker, Dylan Thomas, Ralph Ellison, Carson McCullers, Dizzy Gillespie, George Gershwin, Jackson Pollock, Joan Mitchell and Franz Klein, Odetta and Patsy Cline. They'll never be passé. They'll always be hip. Bach, Shakespeare, and Hector Berlioz will always be hip. Gary Goodrow started to sing, "Seems to me I've heard that song before." David, he said, you're still on the same soapbox as the one that you were on standing on when you and I met at my old loft on the Bowery 10 years ago. If you stick to your principles long enough, you could successfully avoid being fashionable for the rest of your life.
Hang in there, miss, said Gregory. There's money to be made from giving it the masochist shot. The uneducated nouveau riche boobs that speculate in the art market think Van Gogh was great because he cut his ear off. To a certain type of snob, nothing succeeds like being a failure. That's how you get yourself a patron.
I'll always work to pay my rent, Gregory, I said. Dizzy told me one night long ago that if there's one black man left on earth who could sing the blues, jazz will never die. Jack says every time you speak to him, stick to your guns, turn the other cheek. Think of Jesus and his crown of thorns and how he drove the money changers from the temple with his whip.
All right, enough of that,
Said Gregory.
Let's get going to a poetry reading at Fisherman's Wharf.
Gregory crawled over the top seats of the van and started honking the horn. A window opened up on the third floor. Neil, shirtless and beaming like a schoolboy, leaned out the window with bare-shouldered Mary and Tiffany. We just found Atlantis. It was right at the bottom of Mary's bathtub. A few minutes later, Neil came down with the ladies and drove us all to Fisherman's Wharf, and we had a great open-air reading. I sat in and played with almost everybody. You played with Kerouac? Can you play with me? What's he doing now? Is he okay? He's my favorite writer. He's why I'm writing. These were the kind of comments I heard in some form over and over, not only from the people whom I accompanied in their readings that night, but from young people in the audience and from musicians and other people in the arts who attended. It was refreshing to see that all ages, from old San Francisco bohemians with white hair to babies dancing. This was the few weeks before Haight-Ashbury and the whole American scene exploded with a new fashionable merchandising trend, replacing beatniks with hippies. The warm communal feelings that were in the air, because San Francisco always had them and still has a special feeling that nothing, not even earthquakes, could ever destroy, was there. We hung out after the readings were over. These kids are here, but they only see this minute. They don't know where all this came from. They have no background, so they'll never move forward until they do, said Neil. When I talk, they listen, but they don't hear what I'm saying. I'm trying to hip them to the happenings from Chaucer and Palestrina to Van Eyck to Proust and Bartok and Jackson Pollock. And they think I'm a stoned out relic chasing young gals and speed freaking them out with inconsequential meanderings of a mind that has been destroyed before they were born. They think anything and everybody before the Beatles and Elvis Presley are like fossils in a petrified forest. They can't hear Charlie Parker. They don't read Walt Whitman. They just can't hear or see America singing. I'm glad for those younger poets you played with them tonight. That's beautiful. But don't they know who you are and what you've done? They just, though you played with Jack and were in the Pull My Daisy, we're raising a generation of middle-class barbarians. They get high just to sit around and indulge in sad-ass small talk. They don't see smoking weed as a sacramental rite and a gateway to a higher spiritual plane. Man, I'm getting too old, and I'm feeling older than I am. I don't have anyone to talk to. I'm treated like a clown, like Pagliacci, and Pagliacci really had cause to sing the blues. You know the aria. Neil started singing Vesti la Giubbia, made famous by Caruso. Check that out, gals, said Niels between phrases of the aria. Vesti la Giubbia comes from the one-act killer opera I Pagliacci, composed by the ineffable, groovy, and soulfully swinging Ruggiero Leoncavallo, one of the most out-of-sight cats to ever grace the world, of 19th century lyric opera stylings. Dig the rest of it. Neil resumed singing as if he were auditioning for the role in an upcoming production at the San Francisco Opera House. Oh, gee, Dad, he thinks he's Elvis, said Tiffany. He sings better than Elvis, said Mary. Neil should be a rock and roll star. Look how good he looks in those pants when he moves around. He's so yummy.
What do you think he is, a chocolate soldier?
Growled Gregory.
You ever listen to what he's saying? He's brilliant. You broads are so stupid it makes me sick.
Well, we're smart enough to know who to be with, and it's not you, you loser, said Tiffany. Neil stopped singing. Now, gals, he said gently, wagging his forefinger the way Jack did, a gesture later adapted by Alan in the 80s when he gave his readings. Let's not be vicious or hurtful to old Gregory. He's one of America's great lyric poets and a treasure to be guarded and nurtured by all of us. Without lyric poets, no society can survive. He's like Keats and Shelley. Without Keats and Shelley, England would have reverted back to being a primitive society again. Lord Byron, Blake.
Ever heard of them girls?
Rasped Gregory.
You know what Keats is? You know one poem he wrote?
Sure, said Tiffany. By the shores of Gitche Gumee. You know, Hiawatha.
Yeah, that figures, said Gregory. You got the high part right. Why don't you skip getting loaded all the time and do something with your lives?
Look who's talking, said Mary. Now, said Neil. If Jack were here, we'd all be mellowed out. Let's be loving to one another.
How can I be loving?
Asked Gregory.
You got two chicks all over you, and I'm all alone. You're bathing in love, and I'm like a shipwrecked sailor cast ashore on a desert island, thirsty and hungry for love.
We all got back into the van. Mary sat next to me. I could feel myself starting to get dizzy when she leaned against me and whispered in my ear. Her womanliness was some kind of otherworldly energy generating right through me as she brushed her mane of slightly scented hair against my cheek and snuggled up next to me. I tried to concentrate on what she was murmuring in my ear. I actually like Gregory's poetry. He just needs to be kept in line. Gasoline is such a great book. I love Big Sur. Jack really captured San Francisco's special aura. I really like your music. I like you. Neil is so lonely. He wants to be back with the family. He's a real family man and he's so lost. Come and stay with me. Hotels are so impersonal. At that moment, Neil turned almost directly around as we were sitting behind him and gave me a knowing wink, a flicker of a smile, and a thumbs up. Mary was fantastic. I thought about never going back to New York. Her apartment was full of books, reproductions of paintings and prints. She had her own watercolors on the walls and some Alexander Calder-style mobiles that she had made hanging from the ceiling. She also played classical guitar and worked as a private nurse. She knew Jack's work and had a real appreciation of his use of jazz phrasing in his poem. When she was alone and dropped her party act, she was a completely different person. I thought about jumping up on the stage after my cantata and after taking my bow, motioning for Mary to come up from the audience.
David, darling.
Okay.
I know you have,
I've
David,
got
I know
one
you
more
have.
page.
Yes, I'm not cutting you off.
Okay, wait, I don't know what I already
I'm
turned
just
the
saying,
phone off. I'm sorry.
that's okay. I know you know a lot of
I'm on the
people, so I'm
phone.
just
Don't call back,
concerned if
please.
it's an
I'm
emergency.
online. Wait a minute. Sorry, I already put it on airplane mode, but I guess it didn't work. Sorry about that. I'm just on the last page. It said, I even thought about jumping up on the stage after my cantata had been performed, and after taking my bow, motioning for Mary to come up from the audience and propose to her on the stage and get married right there. With over 1,000 rabbis in the audience, we would start off in the bosom of Abraham and walk hand in hand down the highway of life. I called up Jack and told him about seeing Neil again and what had happened with Mary and myself. The old gang. I miss them, said Jack. Tell Neil to keep writing. Is Langston there? No, I said, he's in New York. I think he'll watch part of our cantata that's broadcast on TV. I might be in Lowell with this broadcast, said Jack. I'll try to watch it. At least get me a tape to add to my Amramian church collection. I will, Jack, I said. We all miss you. I miss all of you too, said Jack. It's lonely here. It's so hard to do my work. People coming by all hours and bugging me. Tell Neil to stick to his guns. If you marry that fine young woman, you can just bring her back and you can make my mother smile. She asked me why you haven't gotten married. She says you are très gentil. Very nice. I'm trying to be, Jack, I said. It's a daily struggle not to become a creep. Keep struggling, said Jack. We've got to spread the holy light. I'll say a prayer for you. The concert was thrilling. All the gang came. Freddie Red wore a huge bow tie made out of some kind of velveteen material. Getting dap for the symphonic scene, said Freddie. This is a step up from Gary Goodrow and Carlyle's Macbeth's Loft on the Bowery. You look like a penguin, said Gregory, who was wearing torn sneakers, khakis with one knee ripped open like a castaway on an island, with an oversized red velvet smoking jacket that his date took from her ex-husband's closet when she was over visiting her child that afternoon. He also had a huge scarf wrapped around his neck like a Basque shepherd. Neil came with two other breathtakingly beautiful young women. He was wearing a kind of a Western outfit like a Texas oil man, and he came over and talked to me. I'm happy you're getting your music out here, Neil said. So many cats never do. I wish Jack were here with us. I spoke to him tonight, I said. He sends his love. He misses everybody. Not as much as I miss him, said Neil. He and Carolyn, they are my heart. I've lost them. The train's left without me. I'm stranded in the station. And now we're going to go from a book written a long time ago to today in the year 2020, and want to introduce an amazing person who is Neil Cassidy and Carolyn's Cassidy daughter, who grew up with them. And since my book in 1965, the part I just read was the last 3 years of Neil's life because he died in 1968. She can tell you about the other parts of his life way before his life was broken up for the last 5 years when he lost his family and lost almost everything after being in prison, and talk about the extraordinary person that he was and why in the year 2020 he remains an influence on so many of us, and the world that he came from and the world that he introduced Jack to, and the people and the arts that he celebrated as a natural intellectual, which so many people are because they spend their whole lives studying and paying attention and being aware and being respectful of every person who crosses their path. So to introduce her wonderful videos of her dad, please welcome a special treat for all of us, Ms. Kathy Cassidy.
Welcome, Kathy. So nice to see you.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you all. This is a treat.
Thank
And
you.
reading, David, that was fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is a great opportunity. And I am looking forward to giving you a few clues as to how my dad was before, we always think of, his life before prison and after. And the last 5 years of his life were so sad. And the family, doesn't like the fact that he is kind of immortalized and known mostly, especially by the younger generation, by those years. And the drug use had kind of gotten to him by then. And he wasn't the person that we knew and loved. So I'm hoping I'll get a chance to tell you what he was like with us and why people loved him, and qualities that are not promoted or perpetuated and a lot of people don't know about. So do I keep talking?
Anthony, are we going to run the video now?
Yes, we can.
Thanks, love.
I think these are mom and dad in the videos.
Kathy, while he's getting it up, perhaps you could mention that it was part of the trailer for the wonderful film made about your mother.
Oh, the Love Always Carolyn.
Yeah.
Yes. There were two Swedish filmmakers who followed mom around for 7 years from her home in England, where she moved when she was 60. Mom spent the last 30 years of her life living in England. And this film was made, it was a documentary about mom called Love Always Carolyn. And the filmmakers would follow mom. I remember them coming over here when mom would visit us. She'd come visit us 2 or 3 times a year. And so the documentary turned out to be about mom as she related to the Beat guys. And mom was so disappointed that she never spoke to the gals again. And she really, really didn't like the movie at all. Very sad. Even though she did what, at the beginning of the movie, you'll see it in this clip that mom told them. I think mom was being a little facetious. She said, you can't tell them about me because nobody cares about me. You have to tell them about how I was related to these guys. And that's all that's important. And of course, that's not how mom felt. She wanted to be known for herself and her life. So you'll see what she says in this trailer, this clip.
Hi guys, are you able to see that yet?
We don't. It says the video is playing in picture with 2 rectangles above it.
I believe then we may not be able to put this up today because on my end it's playing, but I'm not sure why it's not going through on your end over there.
I don't know.
Well, maybe we should just start the conversation then.
Sure.
Excellent.
Okay. Yeah, I have some tales to tell, and I have I have a PowerPoint slideshow that I share about my parents, and I've divvied it up into 2 different presentations. First one is about kind of an intro to the Beats, and then my dad's life, and then how I felt at being his daughter, and how it affected me and some of the experiences I had. And then the second presentation is about my mom and her life and work. And I take that presentation about my mom pretty much around the country. And I like to tell her story, especially because not many people know about her. And so what I'll do now is if I can, I'll share some slides with you because a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I'll tell the stories as I go along, if that's okay. Are we ready? Is that good?
We're ready. Let's see if it's going to work.
Okay. Okay. So a lot of these, many people have seen these. The shots here are the mug shots of my dad when he was a teenager, and unfortunately, he had many, many mug shots in his life, and he considered his habit of borrowing cars just that. He would love to take them out for joyrides, and then he'd return the cars. And you can read in Mom's memoir, Off the Road, you know, about his perpetual borrowing and how he kind of justified that. But the legal system didn't see it that way. And so he ended up spending most of his childhood in juvenile correctional facilities. And just as a side, that cell phone case on the right is an example of what we find online. We have no control over what anybody says or sells or produces or creates related to our family. And here's there was an ad I found for a cell phone case with one of Dad's mugshots on it that you could buy, in case you're interested. So what I'd like to do, most of my life has been spent trying to figure out what made Dad tick and why he behaved the way he did. I inherited my mom's prude gene, and I am afraid, especially when I was a teenager, I was not a fan of his behavior. And I found a journal that I wrote when I was 15, which is the year my mom and my mom and dad divorced, where I actually said that Alan was coming over with some of his friends, Allen Ginsberg, as he often did. And that I said, I hated those guys. I hate those guys. Well, when you're a teenager, you know, you want to blend in. I was Miss Goody Two Shoes. I was the first child. I felt responsible for the family, and I tried to be, Miss Perfect all the time. And so I disapproved of Dad's antics, and I changed my mind later on. But I really thought he was such a troubled soul that I wanted to know what caused that. And so I've done a lot of psychological research investigating that. And one thing I found that kind of is very revealing is what they call adverse childhood experiences. It's known that if you have 3 or more of these ACEs, you're really at high risk for mental and emotional and physical problems. Well, my dad had all 10. And when he wrote about his childhood in the first third, his memoir about his childhood, you hear, I'll read out of that in a little bit. You see what a traumatic childhood he had. And according to what I've read and heard, the trauma that you experience in childhood can rewire your brain and cause you to act in ways that are maybe not so healthy. And so my dad experienced all 10 of these when he was a child, under the age of 6. So that explains a lot. Plus, he was pulling from an addictive gene pool. His father was a pretty bad alcoholic, and who knows, down the ancestry, his ancestors, may have had some addictive genes as well. And we did, just as a side note, we did some research into the genealogy of the Cassidys and found that Dad is a direct descendant of Oliver Cromwell. And Oliver Cromwell was kind of one of the original bad boys. So kind of makes sense. His my dad was related to Oliver Cromwell, and my mom would always talk about Uncle Wally. She discovered she's related to Sir Walter Scott, the author and writer. And so I thought that was kind of interesting to have those kind of polar opposite ancestries. And my dad lived in, at the time he was 6 years old, he was living in the slums of Denver. Right now, it's all very gentrified where he lived on Larimer Street, but he lived in a condemned hotel with his dad, who was such a troubled alcoholic that he couldn't really help my dad. And so at the age of 6, my dad would be taking himself to school, finding some place to eat. This is where he hung out. He would join the homeless men, the alcoholics and the homeless men at the mission and try and find something to eat. He would get himself to school if he wanted to go to school, and he didn't miss many days until he became a teenager. But this is where my dad hung out in his playgrounds. And so I wanted to contrast his upbringing with my mother's. Most of my life, I would ask my mother, how come you married Dad and why are you still with him? It was always a puzzle to me and to many people and to Mom and Dad. Actually, they didn't know their connection until they discovered Edgar Cayce and reincarnation. And that was such a relief. You can read that in Mom's book, Off the Road. They were just delighted to learn about reincarnation, because that explained to them why they were together. This big puzzle, this conundrum they'd been trying to figure out. And they figured this was because they had lessons to learn from prior lives. It's all from previous lives they'd left. So we have many transcriptions. Mom typed up their past life readings. And that was a big, big deal when they found that out. But they were so opposite in upbringing and the way their childhoods were. For example, these are my mother's homes. She was the daughter of a Dr. Charles S. Robinson, who was a biochemist, and he was the head of the biochemistry department at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. And so one time I went to Nashville with my husband, had a softball tournament there, and I drug him around Nashville, or actually a suburb of Nashville called Brentwood. And I was trying to find the homes that Mom had lived in. And we found this old mansion that was being renovated, and it was being turned into an event center. And Ravenswood Mansion is what it looks like today in this on the right. This is the remodeled Ravenswood Mansion where my mom lived when she was in high school. They had the slave quarters in the back. They had the separate kitchen as a separate building. Beautiful horse country. My grandfather raised Tennessee walking horses. My mom always had a horse. She had a debutante coming out party. She went to private girls' high school. And today it's an event center where they used to live. Then my grandparents moved to a farm when my mom was at Bennington College in Vermont. And that is also an event center today. I couldn't find it. It had been moved, and it's now in Crockett Park in Brentwood, and that's the Davy Crockett family. And the reason they moved that farmhouse and the barn there, it's got all this signage around it, and you can get married there and have events and everything. It was a typical example of a log cabin and how the pioneers used to expand it with floors and wings. And when I told my mom this, she had no idea there was a log cabin in the middle of their house. Apparently they painted it and drywalled it and covered it all up, but now it's exposed, so you can see that on the right. You can see the farmhouse had a log cabin in the middle. So that was fun. But Mom's playgrounds, this was what Mom grew up with. You know, the rolling country of the horse country, and then Bennington College is on the right. Private, it was a private women's college back in the 40s, but and now it's a co-ed college. And I really was jazzed. We got to visit it last fall. We took a speaking tour last fall, and I told Mom's story. We started in Michigan where she was born. It was fabulous. So you can see they had opposite upbringings, but they had similar worldviews, and they shared a lot of the same ideas. They both were very curious. They loved learning. They thought education was extremely important. My dad was an autodidact. That's my new favorite word. He was self-taught. He would read. He'd spend a lot of time in the library wherever he was as a child, in every juvenile facility he was in prison in San Quentin. He would read books in the library. He was very well read. He would read by the foot. You know, somebody would say, what did you read today? And he'd say about 3 feet, because he would just devour all these books and loved learning and loved to play with words. And I think he's a good writer. I love to read his writing. I can't read his letters so much because of the language, but there's a couple of books of his letters. But when he'd write letters to us kids, they're kind of hard to read because they were parenthetical. He'd have all these parentheses of, do you know what that word means? Go look it up, you know, or he'd define words he was using. He always would teach us. And they both loved literature, art, and music, and especially jazz. Loved jazz. Always had jazz playing in our house. And they loved the big eternal why, you know, the philosophical questions and the meaning of life. And they were very, very connected, as I said, with the spiritual world and metaphysics and reincarnation. And we were raised that way. And so we would meditate Sundays. We'd all sit around and meditate. We'd learn all about the Eastern philosophies and all the belief systems and all the traditions. And so we're really, Mom joined the Unity Church and was very much into the New Thought philosophies and traditions. And we started out in Christian Science Sunday School and then went from there. And they were very, very together. They both believed in family, and they weren't fans of On the Road because they felt that promoted traits of Dad's that he wanted to improve and he wasn't proud of. And but they loved Jack and they loved his writing, as did we all. We loved Jack. He was like our second dad. And that's me and my sister there with my mom and Jack. And he was always around. He was such a wonderful, warm, sensitive man. He was, you know, opposite to Dad in temperament. But again, opposites attract. So I think that Dad really, really was inspired by Jack and his writing and his observations and his thoughtfulness and his writing talent. So often people ask me, what was it about your dad that made him, you know, like we're still talking about him today? And why did people write about him? And so I did some research and I found some quotes and why people love my dad. And my favorite is on top. Rick Blyer wrote in the Rolling Stone Book of the Beats, Neil Cassidy had a brilliant mind and a gentle soul. And that's how we knew my dad. He did have a gentle soul. And I think he was, besides all the problems he had with his childhood and his genetic makeup, I think he had a raging case of ADHD. I think he was initially self-medicating with the speed and the pot, because I was diagnosed with ADD and they prescribed Dexedrine. And as soon as I was prescribed speed, everybody at work was very happy because then I could slow down and I could be, you know, productive in the meetings, and I could do things sequentially and take steps in order. You know, this is diagnostic. If you have that kind of wiring and you take speed and it slows you down, you know, then you can function. And I think that's probably why Dad initially started taking the drugs. But of course, it got out of hand. But he had a gentle soul. He was very sensitive and compassionate and loving. And people don't see that because the drugs took over and his authentic self got buried. but that's the man we knew and loved. And the gentleness I can see in all the Cassidy men. It's in all the Cassidy men, even those who were not raised by my parents. We have a half brother in Denver. We found a few years ago, Robert Hyatt, who was one of Dad's girlfriends, you know, one night stand. She had a boy. She adopted him out to a wonderful family. Bob was raised by a firefighter and his wife. And even though they didn't drink, Bob became an alcoholic. And he eventually stopped drinking, recovered, and he became an addiction counselor. And he's a fabulous artist. But again, he's a very gentle soul, very sensitive, gentle soul. And I see it in my brother, and I see it in even my dad's dad. I think that's why he probably drank, you know, to get confidence and to face the world. And I see it in my nephew, my brother's son. I see it in my son, all the men of the Cassidy, and most of the women as well. We all have gentle souls and kind hearts. And so that was what we loved about Dad. So you can read these other quotes. One of my favorites that was in the obituary, Mom's obituary, written by John Leland in the New York Times. Neil Cassidy was an intoxicating literary protagonist, but as a husband, he was a piece of work. I think that says a lot. That says it all right there. But these other quotes, you'll hear, I don't know if we'll get Jerry's interview on, but Jerry Garcia was, you know, inspired by Dad. And as these others say, enormously well read, the closest thing to poetry in motion I've ever seen. And he wove every experience and anything separate together, every thread of what was happening, a tapestry of presence and creation. Everyone said he made them feel like they were the most important person in the world. And he had a phenomenal memory. And he'd remember what they were talking about, even when they hadn't seen each other for a while. And he always made you feel special. And I think part of that may have been because he had to learn to be a survivor when he was young. He was a con man. He was charismatic. He told you what you wanted to hear because he had to when he was young to survive. He was on his own, and he had to do what he could to survive. And so he became, you know, what people wanted him to be. I think that explains some of that. But what he doesn't really get credit for a lot of times is his work ethic. There's a painting Mom did of his railroad trappings, his equipment. He worked his way up. He worked for the Southern Pacific Railroad for at least 10 years. He worked his way up from brakeman, dirty job. He had a couple of accidents and got really badly injured as a brakeman, but he worked his way up to conductor. There he is on the right in his conductor's uniform. And I'm very proud of that. And he was proud of that. He wanted to be a responsible citizen. He wanted to be a good father and a breadwinner. And he did. He was for at least 10 years before he had to go to San Quentin. And so he made the mistake of giving a couple of marijuana joints to a couple of guys, gave him a ride to work, and he thanked them with some marijuana, and they were undercover cops, and he got arrested, and he was given 2 terms of 5 to life for those 2 joints in 1958. Luckily, it ruined his life. He only spent 2 years in San Quentin. It was a federal offense. Couldn't get his job back, lost his family. My mom, after his parole, she divorced him because she thought he wanted to be free. And he lost the pillars of really his sanity, his family and his job. And then he met Ken Kesey and joined the Merry Pranksters. And everybody knows about that, driving the bus and psychedelics and all the drugs. And I can remember, especially when I was a teenager, I was horrified by the LSD fueled psychedelic. He'd come home with those big posters, like the psychedelic artwork saying, "Can you pass the acid test?" I was just embarrassed and mortified when I was a teenager by Dad's shenanigans. But this is how we knew him. He was Dad. He was our favorite playmate. He loved us. He delighted in us. We knew it. We felt loved. And he would be goofy and funny and do tricks. And he was very athletic and we'd play games. And the photo on the left is me and my brother John in the middle and my sister Jamie on the right. And then John is in the middle and my sister Jamie on the right in these photos. And the one on the left, Dad grew a goatee. I love that look. That's when he had his one of his accidents, and he had the crutches. You see the crutches behind him. And that's how we could buy the house in Montecito in Los Gatos in the South Bay area, in the Santa Cruz foothills, because they had a settlement from one of Dad's accidents. And of course, Mom was dealing with all this chaos. She met Dad in Denver when she was working towards her master's degree in theater arts. At Bennington, she'd got her undergrad degree in Stanislavski drama. And then she went to University of Denver after the war. She worked as an occupational therapist during the war. But then after the war, she went to Denver, and that's where she met Dad when she was at school there. So she didn't bargain for what she got into, I don't think. She'd been raised in a very Victorian, very strict British upbringing, very cold, no affection after you were a baby, no physical affection, never told she was loved. Her father, I think, was a closet or high functioning alcoholic. He never approved. Mom never felt loved, and he never approved of her, and she felt his disapproval very much. And so she expected a marriage where she could be sort of like she was raised. She raised us that way. We were raised that when you died and went to heaven, it's England. And so all of our traditions were British, and all our favorite authors and everything we were exposed to had a British slant. That was her background and ancestry is English and Scottish. But, you know, she tried to mitigate the chaos, and she did a good job. She really tried to keep all of Dad's shenanigans away from us, and she did a wonderful job. She wanted us to be raised as normally as possible. That's me on the left with Mom when I was young, and that was in San Francisco. The photo in the middle is my sister and me and Mom and my brother in San Jose. That was our house in San Jose. So we moved from San Francisco, where all of us were born, to San Jose, where Jack spent a lot of time with us. He also started writing on the road in the house at 29 Russell Street in San Francisco. And he spent a lot of time with us in San Jose. And then the photo on the right is at our house in Los Gatos, where we had this pool. It was the hit of the neighborhood. And that's my sister on the left and my brother and me on the right. And Mom did such a good job that even today, my siblings and I look at each other and say, how did we not know Dad was gone for 2 years? When he was in prison, we didn't really realize he was gone, because that's how much he was home. You know, when he was working on the railroad, he was gone a lot, most of the time. And when he was home, he was just a playmate. And so Mom had to be the disciplinarian, kind of the bad cop, you know. She got a bum deal. And Dad would come and play with us and be happy and goofy, and then he'd leave. And of course, my sister and brother thought that was the best thing ever. And they really put him on a pedestal and emulated his lifestyle. And so I was home being the Miss Goody Two Shoes, and I was the only one that Mom could yell at. So, so I was getting yelled at all the time. She and I had a kind of contentious relationship. But, you know, she had it rough. She had a rough time. It was difficult for her. You'll read, if you read her memoir, Off the Road, yeah, it was really bad. She just kept forgiving and forgiving and forgiving Dad. And she felt that she'd made this vow, and she was raised in the, you know, in the way she was raised. And in the 50s, the women were expected to be the housewife, the mom, stay home, take care of the kids, stay with your man. And that's what she tried to do. And she attempted that. And of course, you know, when you look at the psychology of it, her dad was kind of emotionally distant and unavailable. And a lot of women marry men who are either physically or emotionally unavailable in that case. And so she just kept chasing Dad's love and trying to change him. And it just wasn't working. So the last time I saw my dad, he looked like this. He was 41 here, but he looked a lot older. And that was the drugs and his lifestyle. And he was pretty much homeless. He just hung out with Ken Kesey, the last, and his bunch. You know, Dad would just sleep wherever he could and find places to stay after Mom divorced him. And of course, a lot of times he'd stay at our house. But I had married and had a, oops, did I lose my screen? Uh-oh.
We still see your screen. We see the last photo of your dad.
Okay. I don't know. Mine looks really small. Is it big on your screen?
It's smaller than it was.
Oh, okay. What happened? I hit a wrong button.
Anthony could tell you how to close your left side with the left, Anthony.
Yeah.
I'm not a tech.
Due to technical difficulties. Anyway, there we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So I saw him, the last time I saw him, I was just had my son in San Antonio, Texas. And my dad used to go to Mexico all the time because he could get the drugs, and it was a wonderful lifestyle. And he made an attempt to come and see me. He found out where I was. He came and saw me. I was in the hospital. I just had my son a couple days before. And he came to my place where we lived, and my husband was not a fan because he'd heard all about my dad's infidelities and girlfriends and his lifestyle. But I had to beg the head nurse to let me get my dad in to see his grandson, his first grandchild. They wouldn't let any visitors in the hospital. We were in the Army. My husband was in the Army, my first husband. And they wouldn't let you have visitors. And so I talked the head nurse into sneaking Dad up on the service elevator. And I remember those doors opening, and this old guy, I mean, he was weather beaten and his hair was all thin and he was wrinkly and he was jibber jabbering and bopping around, and he came over, but he did get to see his first grandchild before he died. And then he died 5 months later in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. So that was the last time I saw him, and I was really grateful that he got to see my son. And I got to go see where he spent his last days. San Miguel de Allende is a wonderful World Heritage Site little village in Mexico, about 4 hours north of Mexico City. And my brother had been there in 2008. They have a fabulous, Cammie knows about this. I met Cammie there. They have a fabulous writing or conference, literary festival. And we had, I had volunteered there. I got the chance to volunteer there. And my brother had been invited in 2008, and he'd gotten to see where Dad spent his last days. So I went to volunteer there in 2017 at the writing conference. And it was a life-changing experience for me. I'd always wanted to make a pilgrimage to where Dad died, but I didn't have the funds. And so one day I just woke up and said, I wonder if I could volunteer at the Writers' Conference. And it's billed as the largest writers' conference of its kind in the Americas. It has a Spanish conference as well, writers conference as well as the English. It's wonderful. And so I didn't know if I would be accepted. I've never done anything like that before. And I just wrote and applied to volunteer. And it was past the deadline. So I thought there's no way. No, I get an email right away from the volunteer coordinator. She said, yes, you can volunteer. Why don't you come? I told her my funds were really limited and I didn't know where to stay. So she said, well, I'll host you. Why don't you come and stay with me? And why don't you come a week early and I'll take you around and show you introduce you to everybody and show you the town. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I did. And then I got an email from the executive director, Susan Page, and she said, would you mind, because Dad is like a legend down there. Everybody knows Dad. And so when they heard who I was, after I'd been accepted to volunteer, Susan wrote and said, would you mind if I held a dinner in your honor for the writing conference staff? And then I go, yeah, that would be okay. So they did. That was something. And then just everybody knew Dad there. And so there is a wonderful guy down there, Harry Burris, who actually contacted me and had known Dad. No, he hadn't known Dad. He had known people who had known Dad. And so he took me around and toured me where Dad, showed me places where Dad had stayed. And it was just, this whole trip was so moving on so many levels. It was fabulous. I fell in love with San Miguel. Cammie gets to go down there all the time. I haven't been back. I want to go back so badly. Anyway, that number 6 apartment on the right there is the last place he stayed. He left from there and he was going to walk to a town 30 miles away and get some luggage that he had left. And he was found unconscious next to some railroad tracks. And he died, I think the next day. And that was the last place he had left from. And so it was very moving for me to see where Dad had spent his last days. And so I have I was going to talk about Mom a little bit, but I don't know if I run out of time.
You have time.
Can I
That's a
talk?
beautiful presentation. It's wonderful. Thank you. It's
Thank you.
moving for us too.
Thank you. I like to tell Mom's story too, because, she was rather overshadowed by the guys. She was pretty talented in her own right. And I'll just go through quickly some of her unacknowledged talents and accomplishments. She was quite an artist. She had an art talent that everybody knew from when she was a child. Here's one of my favorite photos of her as she paints her brother, a portrait of her brother. He was a Navy lieutenant commander during the war. And there's Mom painting his portrait. And she also did medical illustrating. When her dad was at Vanderbilt University, he taught medical students. And so Mom would go into the dissection lab where they were dissecting cadavers to practice. I think she might have been paid actually as a medical illustrator for a while. And she said they would try and ruffle her feathers a little by throwing her eyeballs and pieces and parts of the cadavers while she was drawing. But I thought she did a pretty good job. I'm just going quickly through some of her artwork. These are portraits she did of my sister and myself. My sister danced with American Ballet Theater in New York City. And she was a really good dancer. And there she is on the left when she was young. And I'm on the right when I was 16. So, haven't changed a bit, of course. And here's my brother. We were never safe. My poor brother, he's there on the left. That's a pastel portrait of him while he was homesick from school. So, Mom was always experimenting with different techniques and drawing and painting us. And she, of course, she did portraits. She supplemented her income. She usually had jobs in medical. She worked in medical offices, radiology especially. And then she worked for newspapers, and she always worked full time, trying to maintain as normal a life as possible and try to keep our house. She just fought tooth and nail to keep that house in Los Gatos, and she managed it. I don't know how she did that, but she would always supplement her income by painting portraits. So we always had some stranger or somebody in the house while she was painting. And of course, she would paint everybody she knew. So here's some of her portraits of Allen Ginsberg. Of course, he was a fan of Blake, the poet Blake. So there's one of hers of his referencing Blake. And then here's some of Jack's. I think she didn't quite get him. Maybe the sketch on the left, the pen and ink, might be closest. But we all agreed, everybody agreed, even Mom, that she couldn't really get Dad, his likeness. So here's a couple of her attempts to paint portraits of Dad. This one on the right isn't finished, but he's looking more like a Elvis or James Dean or something. And the only time she really got him was she had the opportunity to pursue her passions in theater. She loved theater. So she was the art director for the San Jose Light Opera Company, the San Jose Opera Company, the Santa Clara University Drama Department. She did set designs and costumes and scenery and all the makeup, and, you know, was in charge of the whole visual production. And she did that in her spare time in the evenings. She worked all day, and that was her spare time at night. Well, one time and us kids were so grateful, and we were so lucky to have the experiences of seeing all these productions. You know, we'd always go to the San Francisco Opera House and watch every ballet company that came through, of course, because we loved ballet. I took ballet all my childhood, but I didn't have the talent. But I still have the love. My sister had the talent. So we'd also get to see all these productions from the opera companies, the light opera companies, the drama department. And so one time they were doing Macbeth, and, you know, Macduff chops off Macbeth's head at one point. And so one of the props had to be a head on a sword. And that's the only time Mom got Dad's likeness totally to a T. He looked just like this head on the sword with the blood dripping down. And we had that prop in our garage for years. She got him. Anyway, that's a side note. She also did astrology charts, and she made them look like a work of art. That's mine on the right. For anybody who reads these things, you can see what explains a lot of my issues. And then the one on the right, on the left, is just a fun painting she did of the zodiac. And she would always play around with stuff like that. And she did charts for a lot of people. And then her theater artwork would be, she designed the costumes for all of our ballets. We had 2 recitals a year in our ballet school. And that's a sample of her costume for Alice in Wonderland, and the 2 gals that did the actual played Alice in our productions. And then my sister's the White Rabbit in that one on the right when she was little. And then Mom would do the posters and the flyers, you know, for each production. And here's some other examples of her costume designs. And that's me and my sister on the left. You know, my sister had the talent, but I was the older one. They thought, oh, Kathy will be the dancer. We'd started ballet when I was 6 and Jamie was 4. And they said, Kathy will be the dancer, because I was a little more string beanie and my sister was a little more pudgy. But no, I didn't have the talent. But, you know, she went on and became a great dancer. And then here's some samples of the Midsummer Night's Dream costumes Mom did. And she'd always include fabric swatches for the people who had to make the costumes. Mom always made the costumes for the stars of the show, whatever show it was. But here's some for Midsummer Night's Dream. And this is a sample of one of Mom's set designs. And so she also was an author, and she published her memoir, Off the Road, her 20 years with Dad and Jack and Alan. And while she was writing that, producers came and asked her to, they wanted to make a book out of a portion of her manuscript. She was still writing her book. They took part of that book, published a little book called Heartbeat, and then they made a movie of that little book. And Nick Nolte played Dad, and John Hurd played Jack, and Sissy Spacek played Mom. And so we got to watch the filming, and Mom and my sister got really good friends with Sissy, and they had filmed this in 78 or 9. It came out, I think, in 1980. And Mom was played to be a consultant, but she was disappointed, and it's not good. We don't like the movie at all. Very bad. But, Mom got paid for being a consultant, and she took the money and went to Europe. Her first trip to Europe when she was 56. She was so excited. She finally got to go see all the beautiful architecture and all the culture of Europe that she'd been dreaming about and reading about her whole life. And so my sister and my mom took off for 2 months and went to Europe. It was great. So when Mom died in 2013, she lived in England for 30 years. She said she ran away from home when she was 60 and all the kids were gone. And so she sold the house and she moved to England, and she lived there for 30 years till she died at 90 in 2013. And when she passed away, we found a treasure trove of her writing. We had no idea she'd been doing all this writing while she was living over there. She'd come visit us, we'd go visit her, but we didn't see her day-to-day life. So we found this autobiography she had written. I printed it out. It's 550 pages. It's from her childhood to when she moved to England. It's wonderful. And I hope to someday publish that. But now my goal is to publish as much of her writing as I can. And so to that end, the first one we published in 2018 was her description of that trip to Europe, the very first trip to Europe. And she was so excited. She wrote daily little handwritten journals, her travel journals while on her trip. We incorporated that into this book. I typed up her manuscript, and it was so charming and fun. And she took all the challenges they ran into and she made them funny. And she illustrated the whole book. That's her drawing on the front. And she made a huge scrapbook when she got back. I mean, she wanted every second of this trip documented. And so here's some of her sketches from the Travel Tips book. Like on the left, she's showing how their posture changed according to what luggage they were carrying. And they couldn't get through doors. This is in 79. It's 1979, before GPS, before cell phones, before any, they had to carry directories and maps and all kinds of they lugged all kinds of books with them and guides. And so they had a lot of luggage. And then in the middle, she's showing how some of the bathrooms are a little different. The tubs are either huge, or you were in behind this little curtain in the bar with no privacy at all. And then how the different toilets flushed all over on their trip. And she just makes a real charming, fun book. And that's available on Amazon. And then we found this little journal of poetry. We didn't know she wrote poetry. Never, ever heard or saw any of her poetry. We found this little journal. She made a sketch here from her bedroom of her first little cottage where she lived when she first moved to England. And she called it Musings. And then she had these handwritten poems. And another thing we found were 30 years of these calendars, page-a-day calendars. Look how detailed she wrote her daily life. For 30 years, I have these calendars that are exquisitely detailed about her life. So I took her poems from her handwritten little journal. There are about 30 of them. I took her journals, this calendar journals, and she had dated the poems. The poems were written while she was in England from 1983 to when she died in 2013. And so I could look up in the calendar what her life was like at the time she wrote each poem and put them in context. And then I wrote a little blurb about each one, about what she was doing, what her mindset was, what really, made her write the poem and what she associated with it. And so this is the book that just came out this year, is Poetic Portrait, Carolyn Cassidy Revealed in Poetry and Prose. So it's her poetry and my prose. And that's on Amazon as well. And I wanted to include portrait in it because she was a portrait painter. And this portrait of her, oh my gosh, I have to tell you the story. I'll be done in a minute. Last fall, we made it to Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, right, David?
Yes.
David there and Steve.
Yes,
And yes.
I've been enjoying every second of this. Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Even though you saw it already. So I got to meet this artist, Jonathan Collins, and he was exhibiting his artwork in the library in the room where I was speaking in Lowell, and fell in love with his artwork. And he generously volunteered to paint a portrait of Mom. And so I sent him a photo, a black and white photo of this pensive pose. I didn't want it to be all happy and smiley because her poetry is very poignant and intimate and private. And it's her deepest feelings about her loneliness, being away from her family and the aging process and her lack of love in her life. And it's just really, really touching private poetry. So I didn't want her to have a big smiley face on the front. And so I sent Jonathan this black and white photo of this pensive pose of Mom. And then I had to send him a bunch of photos with her coloring that were cut in color. And he put them together and he made this gorgeous portrait that we used on the cover. And my husband designed the cover. I thought that was kind of cool. My husband, George, he's my roadie and my IT guy, and he's just amazing. He's really, really inspirational and helps me a lot. Anyway, so that's kind of my overview of my parents. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Kathy, we have a friend of yours on, James Canary. He's on with us every week. So I'd love for you two to get an opportunity to say hello.
Hi, Jim. I remember when you came to San Francisco.
Hi, Kathy.
With the scroll.
Yeah, it was wonderful seeing your mom at many of the events connected with the scroll. She was always great.
Yeah, she really enjoyed that. It was wonderful.
Yeah. I remember when it was in Manchester, she came up there and that was great.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
She did. I know. I think she's been, gosh, I see her with you guys. There's so many photos of her with all of you. And the great photos you sent today. Thank you, David. Or who sent those? Did you send
just mailed them to me. I'd never seen them before, but all the places we were in England, all the times I visited her. And for those of you who've been listening to everything you said, thank you. Thank you, Pamela and Anthony, for putting this on and finally having some accurate information out in public for the first time that I can recall in my life. I have so many letters from her, and her handwriting was so exquisite and so meticulous. And the fact that Neil was such a brilliant guy and somehow they say self-educated, actually educated by everyone, and what they did together and the family that they had, which you're representative of, says everything. And also says to all the viewers, if you lose your kids and you lose your family and your friends and your heritage, you don't have anything. So the very end of his life was tragic because he lost the fundamental that we all need. And Jack always wanted to be like you guys and always talked about going off in the country and having a family and being happy. And he really dreamed of that. And he wanted to be as he felt the times that he spent with you. And I think everyone needs that. And our society tries to replace that with drugs, drinking, being hip, being everything except for real. And fortunately, the for real stays for real. And your presence and everything you said reinforces that. So thank you for coming and thank you for what you're doing. And it's so wonderful after all these years and the tide of misinformation, reducing the whole picture to be a dumb football player from Lowell, Massachusetts, and a car thief from Denver meet in New York City and learn how to pick up a pencil because they're with smart guys is very charming, but that doesn't happen to be remotely accurate.
Right. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I'm in awe of your mother, Carolyn. I've always loved her books and her writing and her patience, and to see this additional side of her great artistic talent. And I do work in production design and sets, and she's extraordinarily talented. And to be able to do also the costumes, also to draw a brain exactly, it's amazing. I see why you wanted to showcase your mother. And I have one question for you, which is, you said you got the prudishness from your mom. What would you say you got from your dad?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I do talk about that in my presentation. Definitely the whirling brain. I mean, my brain never rests. And my curiosity, I'm just insatiably curious. And I love words. I love playing with words. I love learning. I went through and got my master's, and I love languages. And I in high school, this tells you what kind of social life I had. I had 2 years of Spanish, 2 years of French, and 4 years of German, and 13 pen pals all over the world. And so, you know, during summers, I had to take summer school so I could fit in all those languages, which meant, you know, I didn't have any social life, but I love language. So after I got out of high school, my mom taught me medical transcribing. And so I love medical language. And so I was a medical transcriber and a medical assistant for like 20 years. But then I realized sitting there, this was before ergonomics, and I'd be sitting on phone books and I'd be having my feet on phone books and, you know, trying to get all the pieces and parts so I wouldn't get so much pain. I was in pain all the time because I just sat there all day typing. So I went back to school when I was 38, and I got my undergrad degree in exercise physiology and my master's in worksite wellness management, so I could go work in companies and help the employees be healthy and fit. So I ran wellness programs and fitness programs for employees, but it took me 10 years because I was working full time. I worked my way through as a medical transcriber. And so I didn't want to quit. When I was done with my master's, I wanted to keep going. I loved school, but my poor husband hadn't seen me for 10 years. And so he said, yeah, I think that's enough. And so, but you know, I'm still taking classes all the time and still learning. I'm taking Spanish right now. I love it, but always taking classes and learning. And that I got from my dad and mom. I mean, she's curious too, but you know, I love people and I love animals. My dad was just an animal lover and he loved people, and he just was energetic and, you know, never sat still. And that's me. I can't sit still. So typing was torture. I worked at Stanford and I worked as their publications coordinator. They made up this job because I had to, the cardiologists had to submit their manuscripts to medical journals, you know. And so I worked in cardiology, and I would type on a word processor. I would type up from handwritten copy. A lot of times, you know how doctors can't, their handwriting. So I would transcribe all their medical manuscripts, and I would edit them to send to the different medical journals because each medical journal had different criteria. So I worked at Stanford, and I just went to my boss one day and I said, I don't really like this. I'm sitting all day and I'm typing, and it's torture. And how many companies, this is what Stanford's like, how many bosses would say, instead of you're out of here, he said, well, how can we make your job more enjoyable for you? So they put me on the social committee to plan parties. I was made I created the employee newsletter. We called it the Cardiogram. I had a staff. I was the editor, I got to do it during work time. I mean, it was great. At Stanford is wonderful.
Could I make a suggestion in the remaining 11 minutes, since we always have people who
Oh, yes.
could some people ask Kathy a question who are sitting loyally in the Zoom audience? This might be your only chance to get some accurate information.
Yeah, it's Murray Weinstock.
Hi, Murray.
I'd love to know how your dad and mom got into Edgar Casey. I mean, that's so wild.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot today.
Okay.
Who knew that speed could slow you down?
Mhm.
Your talk was just so wonderful and thorough and heartfelt. And it's so unbelievable that for two or three joints he got locked up, your dad. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like I have to look back on the road again and get some references there.
Yeah, and my dad's, I love I'm going to read from his memoir, The First Third, because I thought he was a good writer. He doesn't get credit for, a lot of people think he was a horrible writer, but even the Joan Anderson letter, the first paragraph of the Joan Anderson letter, if you read that, it's wonderful writing. It's very descriptive and paints a beautiful picture.
You can't lose if you're a railroad man. Also,
Are you a railroad man?
Well, he was.
He was.
Yeah.
My father was a railroad man, so I went on so many amazing trips across America, last trips across little tiny rail lines for the gold rush country and all that. So when I read about Neil and about Jack with the railroads, it really touched me. I kind of hear the sound of trains when I think of them sometimes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Does anyone else have a question?
That Edgar Casey, Murray, I was just going to say, Dad found a book, Many Mansions, in the back of a car. He was parking cars, and he took it home, and they read it, and then the light went on, and they were, like I said, just that solved all the problems and the puzzles that they had wondered why they were connected.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'd love to go to Norton Wisdom right now, because it always takes Norton a moment to start talking from his dreamscape painting that he's doing. And to let you know, Norton, we're going to have about a 6-minute read with Kathy, as you just heard from the first third, and Davey's going to play some music.
Let's hear it for Norton.
Norton!
Right.
Where are you, Norton?
And for those of you not familiar,
Norton, he has to unmic himself.
Amazing artist. There he is.
Norton.
Norton, unmic yourself, Norton.
Norton.
Now his video's gone too.
Hello.
Just
unmute yourself.
Thank you for the journey.
So, Kathy, are you going to read something to take us out?
Yes. Am I ready? Are we ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay.
I'd like to say, Kathy, thank you so much. That was an extraordinary presentation. You're such a love. What a beautiful woman to be carrying the torch of these extraordinary human souls that play such a big part in history, that have so much even more to offer us still than we might have realized. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pamela, for the opportunity. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you all for being part of this and for helping to pass the word. It's 2020, and it's never too late to hear the real deal. Moses was in the desert 40 years. So since they passed away in 1968 and Jack in 1969, as Charles Parker said in 1945, now's the time. So they're right on schedule.
Okay.
You can start reading. I'll listen to you and try to
Okay.
help out and not wreck it. When in doubt, leave it out. Less is more. That's the philosophy of accompanying and being part of the whole.
Okay. I'm reading chapter 1, the beginning of Dad's memoir of his childhood, of the first third. For a time, I held a unique position among the hundreds of isolated creatures who haunted the streets of lower downtown Denver. There was not one so young as myself. Of these dreary men who had committed themselves, each for his own good reason, to the task of finishing their days as penniless drunkards, I alone, as the sharer of their way of life, presented a replica of childhood to which their vision could daily turn. And in being thus grafted onto them, I became the unnatural son of a few score beaten men. It was my experience to be constantly meeting new cronies of my father's, who invariably introduced me with the proud, "This is my boy," whereupon the pat on my head was usually followed by the quizzical look the eye reserved for uncertainty, which we here conveyed the question, "Shall I give him a little drink?" Sensing the offer, backed by a half-extended bottle, my father would always say, "You'll have to ask him." And I would coyly answer, "No, thank you, sir." Of course, this occurred only on those memorable occasions when an acceptable drink like wine was available. The unhappy times when there was none, with only denatured alcohol, canned heat, or bay rum at hand, I did not have to go through my little routine. Skipping a paragraph where he talks about some other stuff. All his fellow alcoholics called my father the barber, since he was about the only one of them who had practiced that trade, and I was the barber's boy. They all said I looked just like him, but I didn't think this was true in the least. And they watched me grow with comments like, "Why, look there, his head is higher than your belt already." It wasn't such a feat, I thought, to stand that tall, because my father had awfully short legs. When in 1932, the family situation was resolved by my parents' parting, I was not sorry to accompany my father in his retreat to Larimer Street. This is downtown Denver, which is now gentrified and beautiful stores and shops and things there. But in those days, it was like the slums of Denver, Larimer Street. Most especially, I was not sorry to bid what proved to be a year's farewell to my terrifying bully brother Jimmy, and even to my little thought about mother and younger sister. The prospect of adventure filled my 6-year-old head. Besides, I would now be spared the sight of violence every Sunday. With my father gone for good, my older half-brothers, Jack and Ralph, when he was there, would not be able to pound his face bloody when he returned home from his Saturday night binges. Mother used to cry and beg them to stop. But as I observed many times in the years to follow, when these boys began using their fists, only exhaustion would stop their brain-blinding rages. But now all this and other terrors, as when Jimmy made me fight little Mexican boys, were behind me. And for the present, I took an increased interest in my new surroundings, singularly uncommon ones too, for Denver anyway. Yes, without doubt, I had a matchless edification in observing the scum right from the start. Of course, being with browbeaten men, surly as they sometimes were, I gained certain unorthodox freedoms not ordinarily to be had by American boys of 6. Also, My usually drunk father, or on his way to that condition, was of necessity a bit lax in his discipline. Still, I didn't often take advantage of him, since I really loved the old boy. And that's the beginning of my dad's memoir about his childhood. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Kathy Cassidy, for being on the planet and for helping us to feel better about being on the planet ourselves. We wish all of you who saw the program a big thank you. All blessings for all the holidays. We want to thank Pamela Dickerson and Anthony Desmarbier, who put this together, to Jim Canary, who comes every week to keep us grounded, to the wonderful Norton Wisdom, artist extraordinaire, and to Neil Cassidy, to your family, to your dear mom, to all the people who listen to Jack Kerouac and the work, and to every person on earth who has dreams of being creative. And the whole program is about the fact that we can and are born artists until we're talked out of it. So for all of you, keep on keeping on. And when you're told art's a waste of time, tell your detractors that they're entitled under a First Amendment not to pay attention to the joys of life, but that there are never too many sunsets and never enough beauty. Bye.
Woo! Woo woo! Thank you.